Picture a wooden parcel arriving at a prison camp in the middle of a war. Not food, not medicine, not a letter from home, a watch. A fine Swiss watch sent from Geneva across enemy lines into a compound ringed with barbed wire and machine gun towers and sent to a man who could not pay for it, who might not live to pay for it. And the company that sent it enclosed a note that said, in effect, don't even think about the money until you're free. That company was Rolex. And this is the story of one of those watches, a plain steel chronograph that ended up inside the most famous prison break of the Second World War. It's a story wrapped in legend, and part of my job today is to tell you where the legend ends and the truth begins. Because the truth, as you'll see, is the better story. Welcome, sit with me a while. This is The Hidden Dial. Our story begins with a man in Geneva named Hans Wilsdorf, the founder of Rolex. By the early 1940s, he is one of the most important figures in watchmaking. But he has a problem that has nothing to do with watches. Wilsdorf is German by birth. He built his business in Britain and Switzerland, and now Britain is at war with Germany, and a man with a German name selling to both sides is a man under suspicion. There are people in British intelligence keeping a quiet eye on Hans Wilsdorf. And it's here that he does something that is either one of the great humanitarian gestures in the history of business, or one of the great marketing masterstrokes, or, and this is what I've come to believe, both at once. Word reaches Geneva that when Allied airmen are shot down and captured, the Germans take their watches. And to an airman, a watch was not jewelry, it was an instrument. He used it to navigate, to hold a heading, to time a run to the second over a blacked out continent. To take it was to strip him of one of the last tools of the man he had been. So Wilsdorf makes an extraordinary offer. Any British officer in a prison camp can write to Rolex, explain who he is and where he is held, and Rolex will send him a replacement watch, and he will not pay a single franc until the war is over, and he is a free man again. Think about what that required. The watches had to travel from neutral Switzerland through Nazi Germany into the camps, which meant they moved through the Red Cross with the approval of the German authorities themselves. Wilsdorf ran the scheme personally. And by the end of the war, more than 3,000 watches had gone out to British prisoners this way. 3,000. Now, charity or calculation? The honest answer is a little of both. A German-born businessman under the eye of British intelligence had every reason to want to be seen as a friend of Britain. But look at what the promise actually said. Don't pay until you're free. To build a whole scheme on the day these men would walk out of those camps was to bet out loud and in writing that Germany was going to lose. For a prisoner holding a brand new Rolex that a company in Geneva trusted him to pay for someday, that wasn't just a watch. It was a vote of confidence in his future at the exact moment he had the least reason to believe in one. Whatever Wilsdorf's private motives, the morale that bought was real. So that's the world our watch is born into. Now meet the man who ordered it because he broke the pattern, and that's why we remember him. Most prisoners ordered a modest watch. There was a Rolex called the Speed King, small, simple, sensible, the obvious choice for a man with no income and an uncertain future. But in the spring of 1943, a letter reaches Rolex from Stalag Luft III, the Luftwaffe's camp for captured Allied airmen deep in what is now Poland. And the man writing is not an officer. He's a corporal, an NCO among a camp full of officers. His name is Clive Nutting, and Corporal Nutting does not order the sensible little Speed King. He orders the Oyster Chronograph, reference 3525, steel. A proper chronograph, a stopwatch built into a wristwatch, able to measure elapsed time down to the second. It was one of the more expensive watches Rolex made, and the last thing you would expect a corporal in a prison camp to ask for. The order is placed on the 10th of March, 1943, and the reply is remarkable. Hans Wilsdorf writes back to this corporal personally. He apologizes for the delay and tells Nutting not to think about payment until the war is over. But here's the detail that has always stayed with me. Wilsdorf was, by the accounts we have, genuinely impressed. Impressed that this man, an NCO with every reason to be careful, had ordered the serious watch, the officer's watch. As if Nutting had already decided he was going to need something that could do a serious job. And that is where the legend takes hold. Because Stalag Luft III is about to become the setting for the most famous escape of the entire war, beneath its huts, the prisoners had built something astonishing, a secret organization, with forgers who reproduced German papers by hand, tailors who turned uniforms into civilian suits, and lookouts who tracked the movements of the guards they nicknamed the goons. And they were digging 3 tunnels called Tom, Dick and Harry. And on the night of the 24th of March, 1944, tunnel Harry opened, and 76 men crawled out under the wire and into the forest beyond. Now here is where you'll hear the story told a certain way, and where I have to be straight with you. The legend says Nutting ordered that chronograph specifically for the escape, that he chose a stopwatch so he could time the guards' patrols, count the seconds between the searchlights, and time the men going out through Harry one by one into the dark. It's a wonderful image, and it may even be partly true. A chronograph would have been genuinely useful for exactly that. But I'm not going to sell you a legend as a fact, because when you go looking for the evidence that Nutting actually used his watch that way, it isn't there. The honest historians admit it plainly, we don't know. The timing the patrol story is an assumption that hardened over the years into something repeated as gospel. It's the kind of detail that's too good to check. And here's what the legend leaves out. Corporal Nutting did not go through the tunnel that night. He helped organize the escape, but he was not among the 76. And that almost certainly saved his life. Because the Great Escape did not end in freedom for most of those men, of the 76 who got out, 73 were recaptured. And on Hitler's direct order, 50 of them were murdered by the Gestapo, shot in 1s and 2s by the roadside. A Cold War crime that horrified even some German officers. The men who stayed behind were, in many cases, the men who lived. So the romantic version has it backwards. The watch's owner isn't remembered because he escaped with a stopwatch in his hand. He is remembered because he stayed and survived and kept the watch and its story for the rest of his long life. Which brings us to the quiet ending, a watch, a bill, and a promise kept on both sides. When the war ended, Rolex kept its word, but so did the prisoners. In 1947, Rolex began writing to the men who had received watches, asking at last for payment. And the numbers are their own monument. Of the thousands sent out, by that point only about 400 had been paid. Yet in the end, only around 2% were never paid at all. And many of those only because the man who had ordered the watch had died in captivity or before the bill ever reached him. These were prisoners of war, men who came home with nothing, and they paid Geneva what they owed. As for Nutting's bill, because of Britain's post-war currency controls, Rolex couldn't even send the invoice until 1948. And when it came, the price of that serious steel chronograph, the watch wrapped in the legend of the Great Escape, was £15, 12 shillings and sixpence. He paid it, and then he kept the watch. For the rest of his life, Clive Nutting lived to 90 and died in 2001 with that Rolex, and the letters from Hans Wilsdorf, still in his keeping nearly 60 years after a parcel arrived for him behind the wire. When the watch and its correspondence finally came up for auction in 2007, that £15 chronograph sold for £66,000, but the price was never the point. What sold in that room wasn't really a watch. It was a piece of paper trust, a promise made across enemy lines between a watchmaker in Geneva and a corporal behind the wire, and kept by both of them to the letter. That's what I love about these objects. A watch is just a machine for measuring time. But now and then, one of them ends up measuring something else entirely, a moment in history, a gamble on the future, the strange decency of ordinary people under the worst pressure imaginable. You can't see any of that on the dial. You have to know where to look. You have to know the hidden story. If this is your kind of thing, the real history behind the watches, the parts the brochures leave out, then stay with me. Subscribe, and I'll keep bringing you the ones worth telling. Because the best stories in horology were never about the watches at all. They were about the people who wore them. I'm the collector. This has been The Hidden Dial. I'll see you next time.